Hello, Fuel Milwaukee. Come on in. Hey, Fuelers. I see you coming in the room. This is Corey Joe Biddle. I'm the Executive Director of Fuel Milwaukee, and I am so glad to have you all here for today's Race Bridge conversation. Today, we're talking about rethinking diversity, inclusion, and belonging at work. I mean, these are topics that we think about and talk about all the time, but we're going to have a conversation now in light of everything that's happening in our worlds, everything that is happening in our workplaces, in our lives, and our consciousness as it relates to anything around equality, equity, a little bit more aware of the ways that we other or exclude people. And our conversation today is really around what would our workplaces look like, or what would our D&I strategies look like now if we had to reconstruct everything with all that we've learned and experienced over the last several months. So this is a rethinking conversation, and we want you all to be involved, actively involved, get in that chat room. You know, the chat room is your domain as a participant of this conversation. I can see what you're saying, our participants can see, and sometimes they can actually respond when they're not verbally responding. I see you raising your hands. That's right. Get in there and play with the buttons and the keys. I see you, Dan, raising your hand. So go in the chat right now for me and tell me, what are you looking forward to from this conversation? What about rethinking D&I and belonging at work made you want to participate in this conversation? Just go right in the chat and let us know. It'll give our speakers an opportunity to get a sense and a feel for what you'd like to talk about. And then next, let me know if we have any formal HR professionals in the room. So if your job is HR and you're in that role formally, go ahead and say, hey, that's me, I'm HR. If you're not in an HR role, but you have some role where you're engaging others and you're staying up at night wondering if folks around you are engaged, if they're feeling included, it's not your formal role, but you have that responsibility. Go in the chat and let us know. We got about 200 participants so far, so we're going to get going here. Thank you all for being here. Listen, I am so honored to be having this conversation with these wonderful panelists that you'll all be able to hear from really quickly here. Manny, Laura, Manny and I go way back. Hey, Manny.
Hey there. How you doing? Thank you.
Manny and we were just talking about last year's Fuel Professional Development Bootcamp. We presented a topic together, which was a lot of fun, but Manny has been in the HR space for quite a while, and we've shared each other's space many times. So happy to be able to do this with Manny. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Corey Joe. Appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. Manny introduced me to Beth Ridley, who I'd heard about through the grapevine. She's been doing great work here. We'll hear from her. Hey, Beth. Thank you so much for being here with us. She's on mute. She's being good. We got it.
I was saying hi.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. You'll pop up now because they're only seeing me right now. All right, Therese. Listen, I've known you for a while. Probably knew you before you knew me. I've been watching your work and you've been involved in Fuel heavily in a leadership role in Fuel, and so glad to have you be a part of this conversation.
Thank you. It's a privilege.
All right, so some of you are wondering, where am I? This amazing white wall. It's beautiful right now. It's prettier in here in the space, but because of lighting, I can only show you this part. I'm at Spaces on Water Street, downtown. Some of you have seen in the news that MMAC, the Metro Milwaukee Association of Commerce, which is essentially the parent company of Fuel, we're moving from our location. We were on Milwaukee and Mason, and now we're moving to the Avenue. And I've done a little tour. We have a very cool space, very excited. And in the meantime, while they're getting our space ready, you got to wear a hard hat to go in there now. There's scaffolding and stuff all over the place. But we're at Spaces. Spaces has welcomed us into their space here on Water Street, and it is beautiful. There's conference rooms, there's private rooms, there's open working space. So if if your kids are running around and you need need some little private space to have your webinars or conversations, check out Spaces. Come on down to Spaces. There's whole offices in here, so check them out. You see the link there. And just wanted to do a quick plug for RaceBridge. We're looking for sponsors for RaceBridge all the time. If you have been participating in the RaceBridge and you like what we're doing, maybe your company or your employer would be interested in being a part of it. So if so, reach out to me and we'd be happy to talk to you here. So I'm gonna stop sharing and show you our beautiful panelists. My first order of business here is I wanna just jump in and have you guys talk a little bit about the work that you do and where your passion comes from around diversity and inclusion and belonging at work. Therese, I'm gonna start with you. Tell us a little bit about your background. Give us your perspective on this. Oh, you're on mute. There we go.
Thank you. Well, my background personally is that I'm a white woman who grew up in a small town in central Wisconsin. And ever since I was a child, I wanted to find a way to learn about the world and make a difference. And I moved my career in that direction by being a servant leader in the organizational development, leadership development, employee engagement, and change management space. And along the way, oversaw diversity and inclusion training, but knew that training was not the way to change culture. And now I am seeing the field of work that I'm in really shift into this more comprehensive, holistic, systemic approach to helping organizations shift their culture from being exclusionary culture to more of a transformed culture and even to an anti-racist culture. So that's the work that I'm doing right now with a couple major organizations, including consulting with Milwaukee County on implementing their vision for racial equity. So I don't know how much more you want to know, but it really is based on engaging the executives as sponsors and partners, and then engaging everyone across the organization so that we get all of the voices in the room before you apply what you think people need to know. So
I love that. You said training doesn't change culture. I got like chill bumps when you said that. Manny, Manny, let's go to you. Let's hear a little bit about you and your background. Why are you so passionate about D&I?
Absolutely. Manny, Laura, about 15 years in healthcare HR. Worked for big systems. I'm now the director of HR at Progressive Community Health Centers on the north side of Milwaukee. We are, I would say, 66% of our workforce are designated people of color, so we're pretty diverse already. We hire from the community, but we also know that when there's more work to be done. So a lot of our staff are more frontline staff, so we're trying to look at it differently from a lens of progression and exponential growth versus incremental. And so that's kind of my lens. But yeah, I've worked in healthcare HR. It's a pretty diverse industry already, but I think there is a lot of work to be done. We have a lot of frontline workers that we've seen we don't pay as much, and so we want them to look at this as not a job but a profession. And so I'm trying to bring that to this field. I've been in the military prior to that, so grew up in Chicago. Went to Marquette, sailed all over the world in part of the Navy. So I've seen a lot of exposure to international cultures and ethnicities, and I'm trying to bring that to the HR field. And a lot of my career has been in the field, working with leaders and staff on the front lines to see what goes on and to really, and I'm cursed with the creativity too of being an entrepreneur. So I don't want to say cursed in a bad way, but you have a lot of ideas and you're trying to get some of those off the ground and test them. And so through my career, I've noticed that I've had some success in some of those efforts as well. But when you work for bigger organizations, it's much more complicated. It takes a lot more buy-in, and we are traditionally conservatives. And so I think now is the time more than any is to really start to test those concepts, those ideas, crowdsource from your own frontline staff. And we've started to do that here as well. So that's my passion. That's what I will continue to do. And I will turn it back to you, Corey Jo.
Thank you, Manny. Beth, you're up. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so the work that I do, I work with leaders to help transform their culture of their teams or their organization to better support their vision and whatever they want to achieve from a business outcome standpoint. So diversity, equity, inclusion is a big piece of that. And I think what I'm really excited about and what I'm passionate about in this space is two things. First is simplifying and demystifying diversity, equity, inclusion. I think a lot of leaders are very intimidated when they hear those three words, and therefore they'd rather maybe not engage, or they're hesitant to engage. And so I really try to help people realize that we all have sort of the basic skill set that we need to be authentic leaders in this space. And it's not reserved only for women and people of color. So that's sort of the first thing. And I think I've come to, well, I did lead diversity inclusion for Fortune 100 companies. I have sort of like a D&I practitioner experience, but some of my point of view comes, I think, more from my prior leadership and professional experience. I've had the opportunity to live and work in 5 different countries. So with that, I've become very accustomed to how to bridge across, whether it be language barriers, culture, customs, in order to really create an environment where you're bringing out the best in people and the best in people together. So that kind of sensibility comes very natural to me. And at the end of the day, from all of that experience, to me, it all comes down to, first and foremost, treating people the way that you'd want to be treated, and then having a natural curiosity about people enough to ask them how they want to be treated. And you can go to any diversity inclusion workshop and training, and that's kind of the takeaway. So I try to bring it down to that so leaders feel empowered, like I can do this. So that would be the first thing that I'm super excited about in this space. The second, I'm really passionate about positioning diversity and inclusion as a leadership competency, a very important leadership competency. And I've come to that because for many years I worked as a management consultant and dropped into all these different companies. And I got a chance to see the difference between companies that were effective in terms of driving strategies forward and companies that weren't. And it all came down to culture. And within culture, it all came down to the ability to create an environment where people felt comfortable bringing forward their ideas and their perspectives that ultimately leads to better decision making when you have diverse perspectives looking at a problem. So I saw sort of that ability to create a diverse and inclusive environment as a #1 leadership competency. Mm-hmm. And I think in this day and age where we're dealing with so many divisive issues in the country and the community that come into the workplace, being able to bridge across those differences and harness diversity for good on, you know, to support the mission of the company, I think is a really important leadership competency. So I sort of look at it as D&I important for business outcomes. It's a business imperative as much as it is a moral imperative.
I love that because I think of what I was hoping for, and it looks like we have it. The participants on this call are a mix of folks. So my thought is all of us have to have competencies, and I think we kind of look at D&I as a science, and it makes people intimidated. But it's like, how do you shift culture if everyone is not a part of the conversation, if everyone doesn't feel like it's their job to come to work every day and make sure that other people feel that they belong, or certainly that we aren't othering other people. So because we have that good mix of folks here, let's kind of get some of the definitions out of the way. So in the title, you'll notice that I use the word diversity, inclusion, and belonging because I didn't want to use the wrong one. And everybody has different ideas about what those words mean. So I'll ask anybody that feels passionate about it, you can jump in. I won't make you all do it if you don't want to, because you might say the same thing, but give us a distinction of diversity, inclusion, and belonging. What's the difference?
So I'll jump in, as I think, I mean, our organization, we're quite diverse. We have a lot of people from the community that represent our role model, our patients as well. So, but I would say belonging is really important because you can, it's about culture, like Beth said. It's about how do you bring in the right people that believe in your values as well. And ours is around patient care, and how, the reasons they're here. So how do we help people align to that? Because you can have a diverse workforce, but if they don't feel like they belong, if there are, silos, then it's just not going to work. And I think that's where you might see in organizations where, you can have a diverse workforce, but if you're not a strong culture as well, it falls apart. And culture is a really delicate thing. It's not, you can have the data out there and measure that, but I think it's something that is talked about when people aren't around, right? So it's something that's aligned. It's discussions people have. It's what you do, what you believe. I've worked for organizations with strong cultures, and it's a common rhetoric, and I think that's really important when you create those systems and cultures. So.
Yeah, I'll share sort of the simple definitions I have, similar to Manny, but to me, diversity is really, I call it the mix, the differences that you have. Inclusion is how you get the mix to work well together. And to me, inclusion is the act or the process. And then belonging, to me, is the result and the feeling or the outcome of being good at getting the mix to work well together. Do people feel fully included, part of belonging? So I feel like, diversity is kind of like the noun, inclusion is the verb, and then belonging is the outcome, the happy result, if you're good at the inclusion piece.
That's good. Teresa?
Nothing to add to that.
Good, okay. Okay, so I have a question about the world of D&I. So how long have workplaces been focused on diversity inclusion? Like, how long has this been a department or a role or a function? And in your estimation, what's worked since we started doing this and what hasn't?
Well, I think I have a healthcare background like Manny, and because healthcare is aimed at taking care of diverse populations, and historically, healthcare is an industry where they knew that there were inequities, healthcare disparities. D&I work was introduced probably a couple decades ago, but it really was just building a cultural competence, which is educating white people especially about how to learn about differences and how to honor differences. And actually in healthcare, the platinum rule is used, which is, do unto others as they would like done unto themselves. And the only way you can do that is to be open and curious about learning about differences. So that was my first exposure to organizations taking a look at this.
Yeah, I'll share, just being in HR 15 years, it's been there since I've started in my profession. But it has been, early on, it's been very surface. So it's been, the hiring effort, or it's the standing up the ERGs with no real purpose or outcome measurement. So I think it was optics more so. And I think we always struggled with showing an increase in internal promotions and an increase in diverse talent pipelines, because it was very surface. It wasn't like going layers deep to say, why don't we have a rich, diverse talent pipeline? And so I've always asked those questions in my role in field HR is, what can we do different? Who else do we need to talk to? What other resources do we need to bring in? And show me the outcomes. Like, I want to see engagement go up. I want to see internal promotions and succession plan go up. So very unique to me and my role is I want to see the data, and I want to be able to show that we've done the right things, and the consultants or the training we've brought in are yielding what results we want. So.
Yeah, I'll share. I just feel like reflecting on my 20 plus years just working in business, diversity and inclusion in the workplace has really evolved, I think, in a great way. I mean, when I started working, it really was sort of compliance and legal. We saw videotapes on what we should not do, so we don't get called down to HR. Then it sort of shifted to, it's good for business, and let's have leaders in the organization lead by example. engage others in the organization around, employee resource groups, more from a, internal positive culture building and recruiting standpoint. What I see now, which I think is new, and I really would say it's really been since sort of racial inequalities has been at the forefront of our conversation since the death of George Floyd. I see organizations saying that this is simply a competency that we expect of our employees, and not just for how are we making our internal organization better, but how are we being good stewards of our privilege, of our resources for the community. And it's been a little bit more externally focused. So taking this competency that has been developed to some extent for the benefit of internal for the organization to how do we now contribute and be good citizens in the world around us. So to me, that's a new shift that I'm sort of experiencing and seeing, that some organizations that have been in this space for a while are ready to make. I think it's positive and it's exciting.
I'll add on to that really quick is I think I agree, and I see the other shift is the newer workforce expecting that of employers. So they're coming in waves and saying, I want to see social responsibility with my organization. It can't just be a statement, but we actually see results of doing things in the community, and they do become that beacon for the community. So organizations need to expect that of their workforce coming in, and that's what we're seeing as well, is more questions about diligence. So
yeah, let's get into that. So Manny, you and I talked earlier about this, and everything that's happened in the world. I've heard other people express some frustration at the number of statements that have been made by companies, followed by what in some people's opinion is sort of little action, and folks are not really seeing any radical or drastic changes, which is I think what folks were expecting, given everything that sort of sparked this awakening. If statements, recruiting, and training are kind of what I think are with my limited knowledge and view, are the go-tos that we see people. But if training doesn't change culture, and if recruiting is not going to make people feel as though they belong, and the statements are cool but it doesn't shift anything, what shifts it? What's going to start to change culture? What should we be looking for our workplaces and leaders to do?
Yeah, and I'll share what I've done. What I've looked at is from the inside out. To say, what does our workforce look like, and who is getting promoted, and who are in senior leadership positions, and how can we help our diverse talent grow and prosper and not leave. And so if you can do it, because you have a lot more control over your own organization that way, or influence, be able to say, what is the gap? Why can't we get more people promoted, or why can't we get people through education, certification, whatever it is? What are the barriers? And then to say, what processes and programs do we need to now shift and change? And it's a marathon. It's not going to be a sprint. And that's the other thing, is like people want to get there like right away. It's going to take a little time. And I also look at, what's your data telling you? Like, that's where we started. Just like look at what's our makeup, who's leaving, who's in senior leadership roles, what are we paying people? And so to say, how do we move that to create new programs that we can exponentially improve, not incrementally improve? Teresa's got some.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. And a lot of companies are looking at workforce issues and data, and that's great. And other ones are looking at supplier diversity. But the big, I think, challenge is to step way back and to ask the organization to think about, what is our vision for being a fully inclusive culture? What would that look like? How would we measure success beyond supplier diversity or, hiring people of color into leadership? It's bigger than that. It's a cultural. And if you don't start with getting that vision out on the table, it can be more of a piecemeal approach where, well, let's work on the workforce. Let's look at our suppliers. And when you engage people in a systemic way, starting out with, well, why do you want to do this? How does it link to your mission? What would your vision be to have a fully inclusive organization, and engage executives and staff in listening sessions to help define that, then bring representative groups together for design sessions so that they can co-create what are the key pieces. And they'll come up with workforce and supplier diversity, but they're going to come up with other things too. And then they own it. And then change is easier because you've engaged people all the way through the process. And then at the end of the process, that's where you generally get to integrating the decisions that were made into procurement, into all the HR processes, from hiring to performance management to promotion, and into structures. So again, a systemic approach, guiding the senior leaders to think like that, and then bringing everyone along, and then having a communication plan to keep everyone in the loop of where we're at. And I've had real luck with engaging employees and telling their own stories by using mini videos to make sure people are seeing themselves and learning from each other. And I've seen really increased collaboration across departments when you create cross-departmental opportunities to have small group listening sessions as part of the assessment and discovery phase, and then as part of the design phase. So it takes a little more effort, but if you have someone like us, Beth, Manny, and I guiding you, we can make it a little, painless, pain-free, build it into the normal work you do and the normal cadence of communication you have. So, long answer.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, I love everything that Teresa and Manny said. And I guess, again, like to simplify, demystify in terms of my lens, one of the things I think is most impactful that people can do that is super easy, and it may not be big and splashy or noteworthy, but honestly, I think this is probably the most important work you can do. A lot of what Teresa said is each individual has the opportunity to replace the implicit biases that we all have with more empathy and understanding. And I like to say by increasing your data points around the human experience, and that means talking to humans. And I literally, and honestly, sometimes people are like, that's really scary. Equipping people with simple inclusive communication skills to be able to really reflect on where may you have a lack of diversity in your own personal social circles. That could be an indication of where you have implicit biases that are worth exploring. And could you be more proactive in terms of just seeking to have conversations and to listen and learn from people who are different than you? To me, that is the starting point, the fundamental foundation of anything else that you want to do. Is you have to broaden your perspective of the human experience and life experiences that are very different than you, and what you learn from that to inform and enrich your own decision making, inform and enrich your own perspective and leadership, I think is really important. And out of that comes all these great outcomes. But it's not flashy. It's not noteworthy. No one's going to write an article about that. But when I see people doing that simple work and it becomes part of who you are, that's where I see really the benefit of having a diverse and inclusive mindset coming forward in really meaningful ways. So I 100% agree with everything Manny and Teresa is saying. Just offering a simple way that we can all start today is, looking at our own social networks and having the courage to reach out and say, I'm interested in learning. You have a life experience that is not mine.
So folks that are listening, the participants, go in the chat. I have a couple of questions for you. When you go to the chat and you respond, make sure that you respond to the panelists and the attendees, because a lot of you are responding and only the panelists can see. If you want the attendees to see, make sure you change the little drop-down box. If your employer came to you and said, can you give us some ideas around belonging and how you might feel we're falling short as an employer. Is that a conversation you would feel comfortable having right now in your workplace? And if so, what kind of ideas do you think you would give? What would come to mind? You can go ahead and put that in the chat right now. I'm going to share my screen because I want to play a short video, and then I'll come back to the panelists to get feedback, because it's going to take us somewhere. So let me share this here. I always share and forget to add my sound when I have a sound. So let me go back and add the sound now. I've been doing this for months and I still forget to do it. I found this online. You guys know I love finding these little videos online that I think are really helpful and are visual, because I understand diversity and people think in different ways. So if you're a visual thinker like me, you'll enjoy this video.
Meet Paul Ina. Paul Ina is a man, woman, Hindu, Jew, Christian, Muslim, pregnant, breastfeeding, gay, bisexual, pansexual, asexual, wheelchair-using, married, civilly partnered, unmarried, black, white, Asian, Polish, English, Swahili, gender reassigning, atheist Welshman with a skin condition. Paul Ina is also a valued and welcome employee of our company, and we believe in equality, diversity and inclusion of everyone in every way we can think of. It is illegal in Britain to discriminate on the grounds of age, disability, sex, sexual orientation, marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, religion or belief, race or gender reassignment. But discrimination comes in many forms. There's direct discrimination. Paul Ina doesn't get promoted because she's older, or her boss thinks it might be a problem for other people that she's older. But there's also indirect discrimination, where a policy applies to everyone, but has a disproportionate impact on some people. For instance, if a job ad specifies that applicants should be clean-shaven, it indirectly discriminates against Paul Ina because his belief doesn't allow him to shave. Then there's associative discrimination, discriminating against someone who is associated with a protected group. So if Paul Ina's disabled father needs special care, the company can't discriminate against Paul Ina because she needs to take time off to care for her father. Finally, there's perception discrimination. So if Paul Ina dresses and acts in a way that makes people think she's gay, even though she's not, she can't be discriminated against. Not for being gay, and not for not being gay. Discrimination sometimes takes the form of harassment or bullying. These can include threats, jokes, gestures, aggressive physical behaviour, as well as repeated behaviour a person has previously objected to. Under no circumstances will the company tolerate harassment or bullying. Equality legislation also applies to pay, benefits and training opportunities. So if Paul Ina, a gender reassigning bloke from Bolton, does exactly the same job as Paul Ina, an Essex girl who owns a llama, they should be paid the same, get the same benefits and access to the same training. We take equality and diversity very seriously, not just because we have to, but because we believe in it. If you would like a better understanding of equality and diversity, you can find out more about it on the intranet. Thanks for listening. Thanks from us, and from Paul Ina, the breastfeeding, gender reassigning gay Morris dancer from Hertfordshire, who would say thank you himself but can't, as she's completely deaf and can only use sign language.
I love using videos from other cultures because I find that the message hits harder when it's not your own culture. It's like you can step back from it a little bit. We did a race bridge conversation with people from different countries, and we started digging into all these different videos. And I think it does have a different impact when you hear it in a different voice, a different culture, and then kind of bring it back into your own world. I think a lot of folks don't realize how much othering we do of people without even realizing it. So I'll tell this quick story and then I'll give you guys a chance to respond as it relates to workplaces. When I first started working for Fuel, this was many, many years ago, I think I had been the only Black person that had ever worked for Fuel. Fuel was like 7 years old, maybe 7 or 8 years old at the time. And we were in a meeting planning for one of our events. Now, at that time, when I would go to a Fuel event, there weren't very many Black people at the events, people of color at all. I would be overwhelmed by the number of people, but there wasn't a lot of diversity. And I really just kind of thought it was because, you know, people didn't know about Fuel, or we were downtown, and, you know, it's just kind of where people go. You know, I just kind of thought, well, there's reasons why, but I wasn't sure exactly why. So we were in this meeting, and I remember we were talking about the music for the event, and one person said, oh, we should have Pat McCurdy. And everybody said, yeah, oh my God, I love Pat McCurdy, he's awesome. And I was like, who is Pat McCurdy? I was in there like, who is that? I had no idea. And then they were talking about the food, and we were going to be outside, and it was like, you know what, I love those watercress sandwiches from that one restaurant, and we should have some hummus and some in that one restaurant. And I was like, oh, well, what about some wings? We just gonna be like, I'm thinking all this in my head, I'm not saying it though. And if we were gonna have a musical performances, and they started naming these musical artists that were gonna come on after Pat McCurdy, and there was like a rapper, but it's like a white rapper, and then there was like another group. And so as the meeting is going on, I'm just like, I have to say something. So I said, y'all know ain't no Black people gonna come to this event, right? And I don't know what made me I just felt like I could say it. Like, I feel like I could get away with saying this, so I'm just gonna say it, because I almost didn't. And I remember the look on the people's faces when I said that was like this light bulb went off. It had never occurred to them that they were designing events in a way that were not, you know, they weren't intentionally excluding people, but there was never a Corey Joe or somebody there to say, we don't really do that, or we're not really into that. So we started getting very deliberate about everything being different. Like, every other speaker would have to be a different color. Every other music genre would have to be a different color. Every other restaurant. I mean, we were like really intentional. And we could do that because we were designing events, but it was just like this very deliberate, like, lay it all out, pictures of everything, pictures of the food. If it didn't look right, we would exit. We need a Black person, we need an Asian person, we need a Hispanic, you know, we need to feature a gay couple this time. I mean, it's very, like, we get that. But I don't know if you can do that in a workplace. Like, can you hire that deliberately? Can you be that aggressive in saying, we need a Black person, you know, in this role, we need a woman in this role, hey, we don't have anyone that is otherly able. Can you guys speak to that a little bit? How aggressive can workplace be? Go ahead.
I'll take that one. Yeah, because I do recruiting. You know, I'm part of. That's one of my purviews is over recruiting, and I've done that in the past. And I'll share one of the things we're doing now. It's very unique in healthcare. We have a lot of community members that were incarcerated that are trying to navigate the healthcare system, and they're very guarded about who they share their experiences with, what their challenges are. And we made a conscious decision to hire 2 staff members who have had experiences being incarcerated themselves. And we posted the job that way. We said that was a preference and a requirement, that they had some experiences. And it's a completely different approach than what we've done with recruitment. We've always like kind of shied away from that, but this is going to be important because of the community members and the outcomes when we don't get care for these community members. And that's a way to bridge that discussion. And so we're more deliberate about that. And because there is a health outcome related to that. So that's one way we've been more bold in what we've done. And we've had a great support network and a great applicant pool from that as well. And, you know, it could generate more things. But I also look at in healthcare in particular, where we have a lack of color in providers, in physicians, and maybe even nursing, and some of the levels where it takes a lot more education to get in those fields. And we know, again, if you trace it up the line, it's because people in those communities they're not getting those opportunities as robust, or they're not knowing how to navigate that. So we're trying to just tap into other networks and other resources to be able to find those applicants, to create role modeling in our location, to say, you know, for community members, boys and girls that come in, to say, I can be a Black doctor or a Hispanic doctor because I see it in the clinic I go to. And so that's kind of what we're trying to do indirectly, but also create opportunities where, hey, if we're hiring a lot of people of color in frontline positions, let's be deliberate about how we can get them to the next level. And not just for that group, but all groups. And so engineering your systems to be able to generate and benefit people that come in through those work groups that are majority diverse. You know, your housekeepers, your medical assistants, your food service people, where they look at this as a job. I want to change that and look at this as a career and say, hey, we've got tuition reimbursement. We've got, we can underwrite your education for the next 2 years, or we can show you a path to the next level. So that's kind of one of the things that really is important to me, is to be able to do it from the inside out. So I don't know, I hope that answered some of the question, but as far as being able to say, you know, certain protected groups specifically, it's challenging because there are a lot of people that will tear that down, and I think we got to get past that too. So,
you know, you raise an interesting question, Corey Jo, and I can't speak to sort of the legal, like, is it possible to hire for certain dimensions of diversity? But I would encourage people to, in the rush to hire, let's just say, people of color or gender diversity into the organization, that you don't minimize or turn those individuals into a token. They can always tell when they are. You know, the sort of thinking that they're going to bring a certain perspective because of the package that they come in, and you reduce that person to just their outward appearance. And I like to say the package that someone comes in is usually the least interesting thing about them. I will tell people, as an African-American woman, my gender and my race is noteworthy, but in my opinion, probably the least interesting thing about me. So I just encourage people, and actually you said it, that we could share share something. So I just want to share some things. I think this is important when we talk about diversity. I always like to encourage people to broaden their perspective. Can people see this?
Yeah.
Of diversity, the many dimensions of diversity. So these primary factors, the visible ones, the superficial ones, I think is where really a lot of people go to. But everyone who encompasses a primary dimension of diversity has all of these other layers and dimensions of diversity. So when companies are doing this work around diversity inclusion and where do we want to hire in terms of diversity, do a little bit more thoughtful, deeper analysis of what are these other dimensions of diversity that are either over or underrepresented in our organization. And that could be things like, you know, educational background, life experience, where you geographically, all sorts of things that add to the richness. So I think when you are just like, can we hire more people of color, you run two risks. One, you hire more people of color that still fit a comfort level in terms of educational background, maybe where they're from, and then you sort of get a little bit more of the same. Or two, again, you sort of minimize that person to just their gender or just their race, and you don't even harness or tap into or even explore all the other richness of their life experience that they can bring to the table. So, you know, that's just, you know, again, I can't speak to legally, can you hire, you know, for you know, one of those primary categories of diversity, but just do so with caution.
Well, I agree with much of what Beth says, and I definitely don't want human beings, to be tokenized. I do want to go back to what Manny has brought up, and what even the MMAC has surfaced, is there is data showing there's a lack of diverse leadership across organizations in Greater Milwaukee. So by having the data, then if a company looks at their own data and again creates a vision and an expectation and makes a commitment that they want to increase diversity at the leadership level, it makes it a lot easier to then be systematic about training all the leaders on what's their role to hire more diverse talent. Like, where should they be showing up so that they can meet more diverse talent? It's not an HR job. So training leaders on how to hire diverse talent and how to retain diverse talent, and making sure that organization is ready. You know, we talk about getting people ready to be part of an organization. We need to make organizations ready for diverse talent. And that's where that culture work comes in.
I
So
love, sorry, go ahead. I don't know if you're
it's
done.
just very complex. I mean, everything we're saying, it's all, you're right, you're right, you're right. And that's why it's good to have a systemic approach.
I'll say, I love the comment about it's not HR's job, it's everyone's job. And that's how you create success. If you can permeate the organization that everyone sees it that way. And I agree, like in my experience of creating succession plans that are more robust and that there is diversity. And if there isn't, why? And find out why we don't have succession or people moving up the ladder or into different roles, and start to solve it there. Don't try and kind of bolt on solutions and, like Beth said, hire for because somebody represents something. Be authentic and also own it and say, hey, we have not done a good job of growing our internal talent, and we're going to put it on the table, and we're going to share it with our staff, and maybe even externally. I will share PricewaterhouseCoopers, the PwC. They just shared their diversity data externally to everyone and said, this is where we're at, warts and all, and this is what we're needing to do. And so I'm not saying to go to that extreme, but to be bold and say and own it and say, this is where we are falling behind, and this is what we're doing to make up for that. And I think that's really important, that you have those systems in place that can solve it. Again, it's a marathon. You're not going to get there overnight. But I think if you can start to show those progressions, report out to your staff, it's going to change the culture. People will be more included and feel belonging there. So
There's a good question in here about what organizations or what companies can do when they have an industry that doesn't have a diverse pipeline, like engineering, or what can you do, one, to create a culture of belonging when you don't necessarily have that diversity, and how do you tackle it when you want to have diversity but you don't see it in the pipeline? Therese?
I've seen that working with the leaders of the Milwaukee County Zoo and the airport. Traditionally, they know that when they go back to the schools and look for diverse people to hire, those professions, even at the college level, don't have students across all cultures. So Milwaukee County senior leadership has challenged them to solve that problem. So not just to throw their hands up and say, oh, well, in zoology and in aeronautics, we can't find diverse talent in the schools. The next level is to partner with communities, partner with those schools, go down into the grades where we can influence kids early, engage them in internships, have them visit and shadow, and try to break down those barriers, those historic barriers that are keeping people of color out of certain professions.
So I would add, well, one, I think the point was made earlier, you want to make sure that you're doing the work to create an inclusive culture so that when you do bring in diverse talent, they're coming into a more inclusive culture than not. So I say start there and think about the diversity that you have. Even if you're all white people, you are diverse. And so whether that means that you focus on strength finders or, personality assessments, just try to find out what is diverse and then how do you practice creating that culture of inclusion. That's like the first thing, to lay the foundation. Then, to me, it goes back to the point of leading with an inclusive mindset is everyone's job. And I think that's just the case with hiring top talent anyway. Your best referrals are going to come from your employees, who all should be ambassadors of your organization. So the more that you're encouraging individuals within the company to diversify their own personal social networks, you're immediately getting access to people. I think it's so funny. I don't know, Corey, as a Black person, when people are like, I can't find Black people, I'm like, I know so many. But it's because it's my own personal social network. So I think if everyone can kind of diversify their own network, that's where your referrals are going to come from. Because everybody knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, and you may be 6 degrees from that perfect candidate. But unless you're intentionally cultivating relationships that are diverse and reaching out and letting people know I'm excited to work at this organization and this is why we care about bringing in diverse perspectives and people. Eventually it kind of leads you to, but that's an ongoing thing. I mean, that's proactive recruiting that you have to do to get top talent regardless of diversity anyway. I mean, you run the risk of if you just post, you're reduced to the people who apply. The top talent are the people who are not looking for that job. And then you may have to be just a little creative and like, all right, well, maybe they don't exactly have that certification or that skill, but are we willing to invest in training them or investing in their education to get it? So maybe a little bit flexible in that regard. But I think it starts just with the people who are already with the organization who should be ambassadors. And if everybody has a more diverse network, you know, it sort of multiplies from there.
Mm-hmm. My colleague Marjorie Yoshida has been going and checking out the chat, so she's getting the questions for you. Marjorie, I'm going to ask this one question, and then I'll turn to you for the questions that you've been seeing in the chat. We're talking about, and the theme of this conversation really has been D&I is about everybody is everybody's job, but over and over and over again, I've talked to D&I folks who are like, if the CEO or the top person has not bought in, a lot of this is not going to make it down into the DNA of the organization. Why is that? And how do you get a CEO who kind of gets it, but maybe not, to really get on board with what it is that the employees are saying?
Well, that's a great question. And I won't work with an organization who doesn't have commitment at the top because I'll be spinning my wheels. How do you get CEOs there? For example, I would could contact all of the CEOs of the 100 organizations who made the pledge to make Milwaukee a region of choice, sit down with them for a chat and say, what does that mean to you? What have you already done to move in that direction? How are you doing so far? What else have you thought about? And within that one conversation, I would know whether we could build readiness at that level or not. Because if CEOs can't answer those questions and haven't even thought about those questions, then I would say the readiness isn't there. So I just won't do the work without that sponsorship. Any change effort, I don't care if you're trying to implement a new software or, you know, change any part of your business, you have to have senior level support, and they need to be co-owners and co-creators of the solution.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yes, 100% agree. So how? You know, I find that, again, when you think about broadening the dimensions of diversity, I try to help leaders, let's just say white men, identify a dimension of diversity where they feel like they have been the other or marginalized. Everyone has that. It's just a matter of how closely can you connect to that to develop some empathy and understanding why this work is so important. One area where I see that it tends to resonate more with white men as an example of how to get them to really embrace this as a personal why is when they think about their daughters, and I have them reflect on, let's just say if gender is maybe an area that the company can do better in, would you really encourage your daughter to come want to work at this organization? Why are we not? Knowing some of the maybe challenges or lack of full opportunities that women may have. And that's a way for them to sort of connect the, like, oh, I think at this point, most leaders buy into it intellectually. They just struggle with authentically, how do I talk about this? And if they can't do it authentically, they shy away. I think everyone has the opportunity to connect to really the purpose of diversity inclusion, which is helping people, bring out the best in others. And so I think getting them to just do some internal reflecting on, where have you felt marginalized? In some cases, they came from, a humble economic background that they're embarrassed about. In some cases, they didn't go to an Ivy League school, or maybe their peers did. So when you get them to kind of reflect and sort of tap into that empathy, they can at least begin to talk about the importance of diversity and inclusion from a personal lens. And most people actually can. I find it really remarkable when they tap into that. I was working with a senior leader, and his father was blind. And so he talked about how challenging that was as a child, and sort of seeing his father marginalized or not, you know, the struggles that they had. And then he started talking about that. And not only could he talk about the importance of diversity and inclusion in a really authentic and compelling way, it just made him a more human leader. And I think it just gave him a sense of vulnerability that really enhanced his own ability to lead. So I think it's just finding ways that people can tap into this from their personal experience.
I'd also share that look at the competitive advantage. Like, look at what your competitors are doing. Look at the outcomes in productivity with a more diverse workforce that's more innovative. I mean, there are studies out there, Harvard, Pew Research, that show that organizations that are more diverse and have a deliberate strategy around that are benefiting just as a more holistic organization. The other thing is, who are they reporting to? There's a board of directors typically for organizations. What are they representative of? You know, do they themselves, are they representative of more diverse members on that to hold top leadership accountable to those strategies as well? So just a couple of points to lean on as well. But
Yeah, I really appreciate Beth and Manny's fleshing that out. The other thing I want to say is I do like to make people feel right and not wrong. And one way to do that is to talk about the neuroscience behind exclusion and the neuroscience behind inclusion. We are built in a certain way, and there's study after study, and there's actually a great book called The Neuroscience of Inclusion that I would recommend, that explains how the brain works and how we feel more comfortable with people who look like us and sound like us. So there's a gap in the brain where we might be on more alert or more uncomfortable with differences. So there are certain ways to train yourself to overcome that natural wiring. And that's a positive way to make people right. That I understand how this feels uncomfortable, and, you know, here's the science behind it, and here's how you can overcome that.
That's great. Marjorie, are you seeing any? I know there's a lot. Go ahead.
There's a lot. One that's in the Q&A. Does the D&I industry have a response to leaders of industry who have cited a lack of interest or skills base amongst people from particular communities as an excuse for a lack of diversity in their organization?
Like no high school kids in certain communities are interested in STEM, or they're not pursuing, and folks kind of lean on it like, oh well, you know, they don't want to do it. What's the D&I response to that?
That is such a common, especially when it comes to hiring, when people say, well, I'm just interested in hiring the best talent, not diverse talent, as if somehow the two are incompatible. And like I said, they're not incompatible. And obviously, if you're looking for an African-American, you know, rocket science, it's probably, you know, going to be fewer than white because of just the population, right? So, but they are there, and I think it depends. You just have to cultivate those, broaden your own personal network, and not at a time when you need to hire the person. That's too late. You need to work on just broadening your network overall. And then, like I said, if hiring that dimension of diversity is really important, you are going to be open to that additional maybe coaching or development that's needed. But I think people jump too early without having put forth the effort and say, I can't find any, or they don't have the qualifications that we need. I think that you hear when they haven't done the work in the first place. I don't really hear that when people have decided they're going to invest in what it takes to broaden their own networks to increase the diversity of the candidate pool.
And I will point that it's not a diversity and inclusion like group or department issue. It's an organizational issue, and I think that's where you have to be creative. You have to then dig deeper and say, where can we get those solutions? Who's got ideas? How do we put it on the table and say, we cannot find talent in this space? What's the challenge? How do we crowdsource solutions so that it's not put on one person's shoulder or department's shoulder? It's an organizational issue. And if they have to go, like I always say, layers deep, if they have to go to the schools, the communities, and say, why aren't people interested in STEM? What is the challenge? What do they need to become interested in? How do we help bridge that? So,
and a lot of times it's just exposure, right?
It goes back to what we started the conversation about, social responsibility.
Yep.
And I know organizations like the Bucks have a whole community effort, and they have mentoring programs for youth, and other organizations have that too. So the social responsibility of getting out in the community and bringing people up.
I was on a call once with Corey Nettles, and it was a discussion around diversity and recruiting and pipeline. And he made a really interesting point that I thought a lot of us will have to wrap our minds around. He said, we have to just accept that sometimes hiring the right folks in a diverse perspective is going to take longer and be more difficult than what we've been doing. We've been doing it the way that we've been doing it because it's been easier, but it's not working. So this might take way longer than you think it should, or you might have to exert way more, energy than you think you should. But that should, we kind of have to break that mold and say, what does it take to accomplish this, and just wrap ourselves around that. And I thought, well, that was a huge statement to a group of people that were, probably really needed to hear that it's not going to be easy. And, that's why we're in this situation right now. It's going to take a little effort, and sometimes it might take years of planning to get the pipeline that you want, in the next generation. But that's sort of where we are, right? That's where we are in our community.
And even more reason why start today.
Yeah.
Start today.
There is
Marjorie,
no time like the present to start right now.
That's right. Marjorie, you see any other questions?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so I see people hopping off. We are at 3:00, so if I can keep the panelists for another 10 minutes, and the participants that can stay, please do. If you got to hop off, I understand. I see you leaving, but if you can hang in there with us, hang in there with us. Go ahead, Marjorie.
Okay. Do affinity groups help or hurt inclusion efforts in your organizations? If they, how and why?
I can speak to that. I've worked with organizations where we've had massive affinity groups, large affinity groups, but they can be helpful, but also they can also be restrictive in that if they get siloed just to that affinity group and they're trying to benefit their own group, they're actually kind of duplicating efforts where other groups could share those resources or that knowledge. So a lot of times what we would do is create some cross-pollination of the women in STEM group versus, and also the African American ERGs, and bring them together and have mixers or have discussions about what the challenges are. And there's a lot of commonality there. So I think if you can connect the ERGs together, affinity groups together, and create that cross-pollination, I can see a lot more benefit. But a lot of times and the other thing is, what is the purpose? Having a strong charter or a goal or purpose is really important. Sometimes folks stand them up for number one, optics, but also the group standing them up want certain things out of it, and it doesn't maybe align with what the organization is looking for too. So making sure you have clear lines of delineation and a strong charter, and then cross-pollination is important.
I would agree with that.
Oh, sorry. And I would also add to Manny's point, they should be inclusive also. I like to say you don't have to belong to a certain affinity group. The best way to have more energy and ambassadors to help drive diversity and inclusion in the organization is have a very inclusive approach to it. So I've actually worked with organizations where they've actually changed the name of the affinity groups to be like less the African American affinity group to something a little bit broader so that people at least feel that you don't have to be African American to belong. And that helped to kind of revive and get more engagement in the affinity group.
And I think if the organization has a strategic vision for where they're going around diversity, inclusion, and equity, and the affinity groups are included as part of that, that their role is bigger than just having these separate groups. How do they feed back into the strategic plan and the goals and the vision for the organization? And do they have a senior sponsor that liaisons to them? Or do they have a liaison who sits on the diversity council? So they're part of something bigger than just separate groups.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Marjorie, what's next?
How do you make sure you don't make someone feel like a token when you're in the early stages of increasing diversity? For example, someone above mentioned women in engineering. And when you want to showcase women in a field, but you don't have high representation, you end up going back to the same people to represent all the time.
Yeah, that can be a big burden on individuals.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to have open conversations about what you want to have happen, what you don't want to have happen, and not be looking to the same individuals to represent their kind.
I also think you call it out. You have that authentic discussion and say, you're only African American physician in our department, and I want to get more, diversity in this particular field, and I may ask you to attend some of these career fairs with us to basically talk about your experience. And are you okay with that? And that I will be sensitive to not leveraging that too much, because I know you want to feel that you also have to balance what your profession and what we're asking of you. But I think if you can put it on the table and say, we're short here, but we want representation so that we can have more people representative in these fields. So I just think about also just like that thought came to mind of the movie 42, when Jackie Robinson and Branch Rickey sat down with him and said, I have a purpose for you in this role, is to really to generate more representation in this sport. And he was very deliberate about that. And Jackie, he asked him to take that challenge, and he accepted that. So I think those are really powerful discussions, and you have to make sure that people feel comfortable accepting that challenge, and also that you're going to be sensitive to it as well. So.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that, Manny, because I think about that sometimes for myself working in a field. I mean, there's not a lot of people of color, and I get it. It's like, it's important for people to see. My perspective is important because I'm the one that's here, but it's also important for us to see the diversity on the front line, so to speak, in the leadership, because then it makes other people think, oh, I can do that too. We saw that firsthand with Fuel. As soon as I took over as the director, our diversity in our events went up right away once people knew that I was the head of it. And it's like, oh, okay, maybe Fuel is for me. It was sort of an immediate shift for a lot of folks. So, Marjorie, you see more?
Maybe one more.
Okay.
What advice is there for the role of D&I councils that consists of people from every level? Everyone is willing to support initiatives, but what else should we be doing to contribute?
What else should the D&I group contribute?
Yes, other than just like being part of the committee and helping with the plans, and I think what could they be doing outside of that committee?
So I'll share, and then I'm going to be a horrible panelist. I'm going to drop the mic and get off because I'm late for my next meeting.
Oh, God, I'm so sorry.
And again, I guess I'll go back to where I started, in the sense that, leading with the D&I mindset is, I guess, just sort of like a way of being. So one of the most effective things that you can do is lead by example. And as you are leaning into conversations that challenge maybe your own implicit biases and beliefs, and taking that initiative to be naturally curious and get to know people who are different than you, to share and to talk about it and to let people know it's possible. It's not that scary. It gets better with practice. This is how my personal life has been enriched. This is how it's enriched my leadership that spills over into the organization. So I think, you know, as people are sort of walking the talk on a daily basis, the more people that hear about what you can actually do and that it's possible and that it benefits, there's so many benefits to it. I think that's one of the most important things that people can do. People just need to see more examples of what this looks like in action in their day-to-day life. So that would be my recommendation.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you. And thank you for giving us these extra 10 minutes. I know you got to go. Run, run, run. We really
Thank you
appreciate
so much for having me. And Teresa and Manny, I learned so much from the both of you as well. So it was great to see everybody.
Great to see you again.
Beth.
Thanks,
Yeah.
thanks, Beth.
Bye, everybody.
Great conversation. Thank you, Marjorie. Marjorie is our voice that comes in and after she's been in the chat, because it's kind of hard for us to navigate the conversation and get in the chat. So thank you so much for your help with that, Marjorie. Therese, Manny, I want to thank you guys so much. I don't know if folks saw the news here. I think about County Executive David Crawley announced 2 new appointments, and he's boosted diversity in the leadership of the county now to over 50% with these 2 hires, which is pretty cool. These are folks that were sort of in interim director roles anyway, and he elevated them. And I thought that was great. I thought that was a great example of exactly what we've been talking about here today. Yeah. And a couple of times were referenced in our conversation about what's going on with the MMAC. A lot of you have heard me talk about the Region of Choice initiative before. I dropped some links in the chat for you all if you want to connect your employers or if you just want to read more about the initiative. It's something that we started close to 2 years ago now, after the board of MMAC identified inequities and segregation and lack of diversity as major barriers to moving our region forward and moving our organizations forward. And we've made this commitment. Now over 100 companies have signed the pledge and are committing to increase diversity in their management roles and the employment at large. And they've all committed to working together as a cohort to learn together around diversity, inclusion, and belonging, the same kind of conversations that we're having here. So good news, lots of things happening. I know all of you watching are, you know, your organizations are doing different things. And I think I'm very optimistic. Manny and I were both talking about how we're optimistic, and I know Teresa is too. I really think some things are getting ready to change, and all of us are a part of that. All of us are going to have a role in what the future of Milwaukee, the Milwaukee region, and what work looks like and what belonging feels like for the generations that come behind us. So thank you all for participating. Go ahead, Teresa.
One more comment. Thank you, Corey Joe, for having us. This was fabulous. I don't want it to sound like I'm against education, because training is critical. I'm actually in the 24-hour long class on unlearning racism that the YWCA is hosting. I've already completed other training that they've completed. I have a pile of books this big, because as a white woman, my job is to continue to be a learner all the time. So I'm not against learning, but from the business perspective, I am for integrating learning and training development into a systemic approach that is sponsored at the top. Yeah. So I really am so excited about what the YWCA offers and what we're seeing available on the internet, many resources now. So I just like to help people integrate all that good stuff into their culture and into their plans.
And so the panelists are still listed on the Fuel website with links to their LinkedIn account, so you'll be able to see their individual platforms and websites, and they all have their own resources and classes and services and offerings. So please reach out, share with your HR department, share with your leadership, let folks know what you learned today. These are great folks, and I wanted to bring them on so that you all could hear what they had to say. So you all know that I have another video for you, right? You know I do. At the end.
Yeah, bring it.
Now it's time for you to go in the chat. So there's a couple of things. I want you to give the love notes to the panelists, because I'll share that with them afterwards so they can see the impact that they've had on you, if they sparked any ideas, if they gave you any inspiration, if you just enjoyed hearing their perspectives, if you got a good quote, a good graphic or something, and you know, we got a title of a book now that folks are going to be reading. Go ahead in the chat right now and kind of send your love notes. Also, as always, if you have any topics, speakers, anything that you want to share with me that you want me to be thinking about, go ahead and put that in the chat. And then if you've had a chance to talk to a room full of CEOs to talk about the future of the workforce, what would you want them to focus on? What ideas would you put forth? What would you want employers to be thinking about? So any of those three things, comment on all of them, comment on one of them, whatever you want, but those are the three things I kind of want you to be focusing on. So let me go ahead and share my screen, because you know I got one last video that is from Accenture, which is a MMAC member, and I think they have a pretty cool video that was done here 3 years ago, and it's perfect and timely for right now. If I can get it to work, there we go. There we go. I thought we had it. Technology. Wait a minute. Share again. Share screen. Sound. Yes. There we go. Keep those comments coming while we're watching the video. Send your love notes to the panelists. Fusion starts with I. I love that. I love that video so much. I had to share it. Thank you again to Vanny, Therese, and Beth. You guys were awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Corey Joe. Yeah, this is fantastic. So
Yeah,
yeah, that video I always get emotional when I see that video.
It's so
Just,
good.
beautiful.
it makes you feel good though, right?
Mhm.
Lots of love notes. I'll make sure I'll email you guys the chat. Oh,
Thank you.
folks want the video link. I'll email the link to that video when I send the replay for folks. There are people saying that they're in tears. I know it's such a good video. It's so
Beautiful.
good. It's so good. And you guys are so good. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Corey.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.